Welcome to Math with Mr. P. Today we are going to be doing 6th grade math, chapter 3, lesson 4, and we are multiplying decimals by decimals. Last time we multiplied whole numbers by decimals, and today we're going to be multiplying decimals by decimals. We're going to touch on the last lesson for a little bit, and we're still going to go ahead and ignore the decimal when we multiply. The big rule is we put the longer number on top. So for example, if my question were 0.182, for example, multiplied by, I don't know, let's say 0.53, just pulling numbers randomly, we would always put the longer of the two numbers up top because 0.182 has 4 digits, 4 different place values. We would put this on top rather than the one that only has 3. This will make our lives a lot easier. Now, what I would suggest is ignoring the decimals completely for this point. This is basically going to be 182 times 53 because the zeros at the beginning are not going to really do anything. But let's just multiply across, and then we are going to identify the decimals and what we need to do with those. I'm going to go ahead and circle that one again. There we go. So we're going to go ahead and do standard algorithm multiplication, where I'm going to start with my 3 and I'm going to multiply it by 2, then by 8, then by 1, and then I will also multiply it by 0 and do a placeholder 0, then do the 5 and do the exact same thing. So let's do this step by step. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 8 will be 24. Carry the 2 from the 24.
Please call the office. Please call the office.
I do apologize for that. As you can see, I'm recording on campus, so that may happen from time to time. 8 times 3, again, was 24. We carried the 2. 3 times 1 this time will be 3, plus the 2 will be 5. And then we can do 3 times 0 if we'd like. It doesn't really matter. It's still going to be 0. So now what I'm going to do is as follows. I'm going to go ahead and clear this all out. And now I'm going to multiply by the 5s. 5 times 2. Before I do that, I do need to put a placeholder 0 since I'm multiplying by a new place value. 5 times 2 will be 10, so I'll put another 0 there. Carry the 1. 5 times 8 will be 40, plus the 1 will be 41. 5 times 1 will be 5, plus the 4 will be 9, and 5 times 0 will be 0. Now, if you'd like, you can multiply by this 0 place value. You would have to put 2 placeholder 0. 0 times 2 would be 0. 0 times 8 would be 0. 0 times 1 would be 0. And 0 times 0 would be 0. Really doesn't change anything. When we add these all up, we're going to get the grand total of 6 plus 0 would be 6 in that place value. 4 plus 0 would be 4. 5 plus 1 would give me 6. 0 plus 9 plus 0 would give me 9. And 0 plus 0 would give me 0. And another 0 over here would give me 0. We technically don't need those 2 zeros in the front. So if you didn't multiply by the zeros, it's not the end of the world. We can technically get rid of those because they're not going to do anything. But the decimal now is the big part. This is the big important part. So I'm going to go ahead and erase a lot of this extra clutter around here so we can see exactly how many numbers are after a decimal. There are 3 numbers after this decimal and 2 numbers after this decimal. We need all 5 of those numbers because what we're going to do is we're going to start from the very end and we're going to jump to the left the same number of time there are numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which means I need to annex a 0. The decimal will go here, which means my answer will be 0.09646. And I can double check my work using my calculator. So the original was 0.182 times 0.53, which gives me 0.09646, which means we did this correctly. that is the biggest trick of multiplying decimals by decimals, is just to ignore the decimal. And I think that's where I lose a lot of my students, is they see two decimals and they immediately break down. Let's do an easier problem straight from the book to highlight. So that was a harder level problem. Let's look at an easier level problem. For example, the table shows the weight of a 1 pound object on each planet. So if we brought something from Earth that weighs 1 pound on Earth, if we took it to Jupiter, it would weigh 2.3 pounds. The gravity is higher on Jupiter. Therefore, it would weigh more on Jupiter. If we were to take it to Mercury, it would weigh less. It would be 0.3 pounds, less than what it weighs on Earth, and so on and so forth. A 0.5 pound object weighs 1/2 as much as a 1 pound object. If a cheeseburger weighed 1/2 a pound on Earth, what will it weigh on Jupiter? So this is where it really does come into play when we use decimals and multiplying them by each other. So if we had what is a 1/2 pound burger on Jupiter, what would it weigh on Jupiter? So if it's 1/2 a pound on Earth, what would it weigh on Jupiter? So we take the table and we actually convert it. What this table tells us is if something weighs a pound on Earth, it would weigh 2.3 pounds on Jupiter. So Jupiter is 2.3 times more heavy than what Earth is. So say, for example, you weigh 80 pounds on Earth. 80 pounds. You would multiply this by 2.3 to find out how much you would weigh on Jupiter, because you'd weigh 2.3 times more on Jupiter. 3 times 0 would be 0. 3 times 8 would be 24. And I can't write that. There I go. Placeholder. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 8 is 16. Add these together. 0, 4, 8, 1. One number after a decimal. So you would weigh 184 pounds on Jupiter if you weighed 80 pounds on Earth. So with that being said, we're going to find out how much a 1/2 pound cheeseburger would weigh on Jupiter. 1/2 pound would be 0.5. Jupiter is going to be 2.3 times more. And I'm going to double check 2.3, yes. It's going to be 2.3 times heavier than what it would on Earth. So both numbers have 2 digits for place values. So it really doesn't matter which one you put on top. I'm going to tell you the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to put 2.3 on top, and I'm going to put 0.5 on the bottom because I like to multiply by 5s, and it's a lot easier to do that. So let's go ahead and erase these so we have some room, and let's bring this to the middle. I wrote it slanted, so I'm going to go ahead and erase this and rewrite it. 2.3 times 0.5. Again, we got our 2.3 because of how much everything weighs on Jupiter. It's 2.3 times heavier than what Earth weighs. And if we have a 5 pound cheeseburger, we're going to multiply it by 2.3 to see what it would weigh on Jupiter. So 1/2 pound cheeseburger on Jupiter. 5 times 3 would be 15. Carry the 1. 5 times 2 would be 10, plus 1 is 11. Now, I can put a placeholder 0 here and then multiply. 0 times 3 would be 0. 0 times 2 would be 0 again. It's still not going to change anything. I'm still going to get 1, 1, 5. But here's where the kicker comes in. I now need to count how many numbers came after a decimal. Decimal there, 1 number. Decimal here, 1 number. So 2 numbers, add these 2 together. 2 numbers will be after a decimal, therefore I need to go right to left, 1, 2 jumps. So a 1/2 pound cheeseburger on Jupiter would weigh 1.15 pounds. So not even a pound and a quarter, but it would be over a pound is what it would weigh on Jupiter. And then again, we can always check our work using our calculator. 2.3 times 0.5 should equal 1.15, and it does. So again, the biggest trick is to just wait until the end to deal with the decimal. So realistically, 2.3 times 0.5 is the same thing as us multiplying 23 times 5. That's all we're doing. We're ignoring the decimals until the very, very end. Let's do a few more examples. What would a barbell that weighs 5 pounds on Earth weigh on Jupiter? They're just pulling Jupiter for this one. Use the results from exercises 1 and 2 to find 0.5 times 0.05 times 2.3. Explain your answer. So we're going to focus on number 2. What would a 5-pound barbell weigh on Jupiter? This is not necessarily decimals multiplied by decimals, but this is going back to lesson, I believe it was lesson 3. So 2.3 times 5, because remember, weighs 5 pounds on Earth, and Jupiter's 2.3 times more the weight. So this one isn't an example for this lesson of decimals versus, or decimals multiplied by decimals, but you'll see what happens. 5 times 3 is 15, carry the 1. 5 times 2 is 10, plus the 1 is 11. And guess what? Only one number is after a decimal this time because 5 is a whole number. We just do 1. So it'd be 11.5, 11.5 pounds. Remember, when you ever multiply by a decimal, whether both numbers are decimals or not, we only count the numbers after a decimal, and then we jump from right to left at the end of it. So this changed the game a little bit. Now, based on last lesson, it was 0.5, and notice when it changed, because I had two numbers after a decimal, I just jumped 1, 2, and it was 1.15. So the decimal does change things at the end. You still treated both problems as 23 times 5, and that's all we had to do. Now this is going to be a pretty short lesson. I think we're going to wrap it up here pretty soon because I think we got to the major overhaul of it. But let's try an example where we have a few more place values. For example number 1, we're going to find 3.6 times 0.05. Remember, the key thing is to always write the longer number on top. So 0.05 because it had 3 place values, and 3.6 will be at the bottom because 3.6 only has 2. Now, you can argue that these zeros are not needed and this would basically be 36 times 5. You can do it this way too, and I'll show you what happens with both. Let's change the color to green for this one. 6 times 5 will be 30, carry the 3. 6 times 0 will be 0, plus the 3 will be 3. 6 times the other 0 will just be 0. Placeholder, I'm going to get rid of this 3. 3 times 5 is 15, carry the 1. 3 times 0 is 0, plus the 1 is 1. 3 times 0 is 0. This is a 5. If I add these together, I'm going to get 0, 8, 1, and 0. I'm going to leave that there, and I'll come back to it. Let's do this color, and let's go over here. 5 times 6 is still 30, carry the 3. 5 times 3 will be 15, plus the 3 will be 18. And this is where we come in. So we are still looking at how many numbers were after a decimal. 3. So I would do 1, 2, 3. So my answer would be 0.18. And then I get the 0 to fade away at the end of a decimal. And over here it'd be 1, 2, 3 still. Even though I didn't put the decimals here, like I said, I rewrote what this is. This is basically 36 times 5 is what you're doing. This would still be 0.18. And then any zeros at the end of a decimal fade away. It's like saying, oh, I have $7.00. You don't need to say the 0 part. You just have $7. Same idea happens when it comes to decimals. We don't need to put the 0 at the end if it's the last number. If there's a 0 and then something else after it, so say you have like $7.01, then yeah, you keep it like this. But if it's just $7, you can get rid of those 2 zeros because we don't need it. let's do one more example and we'll call it a day. I don't know if I like that one for this. Let's pick one of these. I'm going to pick the harder of the three, and that'll actually be this one. 0.014. 0.014 times 3.7. So I'm going to be multiplying the 7 out, and I'm actually going to ignore the zeros this time. I'm still going to keep them there because I need the decimal and I need this decimal, but I'm going to go ahead and ignore those zeros when I multiply. 7 times 4 will be 28. Carry the 2. 7 times 1 is 7, plus the 2 will be 9. And then I'm going to ignore these zeros, or you can bring down 2 zeros because 7 times 0 and 7 times 0 will be 0. It's up to you. Then I'm going to multiply 3 across. 3 times 4 will be 12. Oh, before I do that, placeholder 0. 3 times 4 will be 12. Carry the 1. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. And 3 times the zeros will be zeros. Add these together, and 8 plus 0 will be 8. 9 plus 2 will be 11, so I'm going to carry the 1 up here. 1, 4, and 0 will make 5, and then I can do my other 2 zeros if I'd like. The most important step here is to figure out how many numbers came after a decimal. And I do apologize for that. I am recording at school, so someone just came and took out the garbage, but it's fine. So we have 3 digits here after a decimal, and I have 1 digit here after a decimal. So I'll have 4 digits to jump. I start at the very right at the end, jump 1, 2, 3, 4. So my answer should be 0.0518. And as always, we can double check our work. Calculator. Our question again was 0.014 times 3.7, and it gave us 0.0518, which is exactly what we got, and that's it. So recap again, remember when you multiply decimals by decimals, always put the longer of the two numbers on top and ignore the decimals until the end. If for any reason there are zeros at the beginning, like this one, we can ignore them until the end. If you want to bring them down like I did down here and over here, that's up to you. And anytime you jump spaces like this, if you ran out, you just annex zeros to jump those spaces. Remember to count the decimals, numbers after a decimal, I should say, at the end, and to add them both, especially if both numbers had decimals. So 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4 jumps, and the decimals right here. And that's all there is to it. If you have any questions or concerns, as always, leave them in the comments section. And then until the next one, this has been Mr. P.